My son handed my gift back to me at his graduation dinner. Didn't open it, just slid the envelope across the white tablecloth and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Mom, you really didn't have to." His girlfriend, the one with the law degree and the laugh that never reached her eyes, added, "We appreciate the thought." Then she set her hand on top of the envelope like she was covering something embarrassing, like she was protecting her boyfriend from his own mother. I didn't say a word. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. 3 days later, I sat in my accountant's office and made a decision that would change everything. Not for me, for them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not at the restaurant, not at the dinner. It started 34 years ago in a dry cleaning shop on Mercer Street in Columbus, Ohio, pressing other people's clothes 6 days a week. His name is my son, and I raised him alone. His father left when he was 4, packed a bag on a Tuesday and never came back. No forwarding address, no child support that ever materialized, nothing. Just me, a $600 a month apartment above a laundromat, and a pressing iron I could operate in my sleep. I learned quickly that survival wasn't just about working hard. It was about working smart and staying invisible. The women who ran the shop alongside me spent their overtime money on lottery tickets and new shoes. I spent mine on a money market account at Midland Savings, then on a 12-unit apartment building on the east side of Columbus that everyone, my mother, my sister, my coworkers, told me was a terrible investment. I bought it anyway. For $148,000, every cent I had, plus a loan I had no business qualifying for. That was 1991. My son grew up knowing I worked at the dry cleaning shop. He knew I pressed suits and steamed wedding dresses and once accidentally scorched a customer's cashmere coat and had to pay for it out of 3 weeks of wages. He knew the apartment we lived in was small and that we ate a lot of soup in January and February when the heating bills came due. He did not know about the building on the east side or the 4 others I bought in the years that followed. He didn't know that by the time he turned 16, I owned enough rental property to have quietly stepped away from the dry cleaning shop. But I didn't, because the shop kept me grounded, and because I wasn't ready to answer questions I wasn't ready to ask myself. I wanted him to become someone who didn't need my money to feel like he mattered. I'm not sure I succeeded. He graduated from Ohio State with a business degree, then went to Northwestern for his MBA. He moved to Chicago, got a job at a consulting firm, started dating a woman his firm had practically hand-delivered to him. She was a junior partner at the law firm 2 floors up from his office. Her family had a place in the Hamptons and another in Vail. When he called to tell me about her, his voice had a quality I'd never heard before, like he was finally standing somewhere he'd always been trying to reach. I told him I was happy for him. I meant it, but I listened carefully. I drove to Chicago for the graduation dinner. Not his graduation, hers. She passed the Illinois bar and made full partner in the same month. His firm reserved a private room at a restaurant called Hennessy's on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices and the waitstaff never refills your water without asking first. I wore my good dress, navy blue, bought at Talbot's 3 years ago for my sister's retirement party. I knew when I walked in that it wasn't right for the room, but I wore it anyway. Her parents were already there. Her father, a real estate developer from Greenwich, Connecticut, stood when I came in, shook my hand with the practiced warmth of a man who shakes a lot of hands, and immediately forgot my name. I watched him forget it, watched the moment it slipped out of his head like water through a screen, and I smiled and sat down. My son hugged me. He smelled like cologne I didn't recognize. He looked well. He looked like he belonged there in a way he hadn't looked the last time I'd seen him, at Christmas, in my apartment, eating the pot roast I'd been making since he was 8. The dinner was fine. The food was exceptional. I ate slowly and said little and watched. Her mother talked about a cruise they were taking in September. Her father mentioned a development project in Scottsdale. My son nodded along, laughing at the right moments, reaching for her hand across the table at the right moments. She was smart and poised and laughed at things that weren't quite funny, but in a way that made everyone feel clever for being in the room. Then the dessert course came, and I reached into my purse. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with a small gold sticker I'd pressed on myself. Inside was a card and, behind the card, a cashier's check. The amount wasn't something I'll put into this story, because the amount isn't the point. What I'll say is that it was substantial. It was 34 years of careful work and patient waiting and believing in something no one else could see yet. I slid it across to my son. He looked at the envelope and something crossed his face. Something quick, almost imperceptible. But I'd been reading that face for 34 years. He glanced at her. She looked at the envelope. Then she set her hand on top of it, that practiced, gentle, dismissive gesture, and said, "We appreciate the thought." My son picked it up. He didn't open it. He said, "Mom, you really didn't have to," and set it beside his dessert plate like it was a card from a distant relative. Her father made a small joke about dry cleaning being a recession-proof business. Everyone laughed. My son laughed. I watched his face while he laughed. I picked up my water glass. I said nothing. I drove back to my hotel on the south side. I hadn't told my son I was staying overnight. He assumed I'd driven back to Columbus. And I sat on the edge of the bed in my navy blue Talbot's dress, and I thought for a very long time. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I'd expected to be angry, and instead I felt something quieter and more clarifying. Like a room you've been squinting around and suddenly getting a light switched on. My son had been embarrassed by me. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because of what I represented in that room. A woman who pressed other people's clothes, who lived alone in Columbus, who showed up in a 3-year-old dress and handed an envelope across a table like it meant something. The thing was, it did mean something. He just didn't know what was inside it. I opened my laptop and called my attorney, Clyde Barron, at his personal number. It was late, but Clyde had been handling my affairs for 22 years and understood that I didn't call his personal number for small matters. "I need to review the trust documents," I told him, "and I need to make a change to one of the property listings." He asked which one. I told him. There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "I'll be in your office Thursday." Clyde Barron's office was in a brownstone in German Village, a 10-minute drive from my apartment. I'd been going there since he was a young associate working under a man named Herbert Kessler, who'd handled my very first property closing and told me, with genuine sincerity, that he thought I was making a mistake. I sat across from Clyde's desk on Thursday morning and signed 4 documents. Then I told him the rest of what I needed done. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me over his reading glasses. "You've been planning this for a while," he said. "I've been patient," I said. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do about notification?" "Nothing yet," I said. "I'll handle that part myself." What I didn't tell Clyde, what I didn't tell anyone, was that 3 weeks before the graduation dinner, I'd hired someone to look into my son's girlfriend. Not because I suspected anything criminal, because I suspected something worse. That she was the kind of person who made people smaller so she could feel larger. And I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made any decisions. His name was Dwight Paulson. He'd worked financial crimes for the FBI for 19 years before retiring to do private investigative work. A colleague at my property management company had used him twice and called him the most thorough man she'd ever hired. I met Dwight at a diner on Henderson Road on a Wednesday morning. He was 60-something, compact, with careful eyes and the unhurried manner of someone who'd learned that patience produced more information than urgency ever could. He ordered black coffee and a slice of toast. He didn't take notes on paper. He remembered everything. I told him what I wanted to know. Not anything salacious. I wanted to know about her professional conduct, her financial dealings, her history with business partners and former employers. I wanted to know if she was who she appeared to be. "This may take 2 weeks," he said. "Take 3, I said. "Do it right." He called me on a Saturday morning 17 days later. "She's clean," he said, which surprised me slightly. "Professionally impeccable. No complaints, no disciplinary actions, no financial irregularities. He paused. But I waited. She's been corresponding with a development company in Austin, he said. A company your son's consulting firm was hired to advise on a merger last spring. The correspondence is personal, not through firm channels. I asked him what that meant. It means she knew things about that deal she shouldn't have known, he said. And it means someone at her firm may have used that information to advise another client. He was careful with his words, as he always was. I'm not in a position to tell you whether that's illegal. That's a question for a securities attorney. What I can tell you is that it happened. I sat with that for a long moment. Thank you, Dwight. What would you like me to do with this? Nothing yet, I said. I'll be in touch. My son called me 2 weeks after the dinner. He said he was sorry about how the evening had gone, that it had been a long day, that he hoped I understood. He didn't mention the envelope. He didn't ask if I was all right. He asked if I'd gotten home safely, and then mentioned, almost in the same breath, that he and his girlfriend were looking at condos in Lincoln Park, and the prices were, he said with a small laugh, pretty eye-opening. I told him I was glad he'd called. I told him the drive home had been fine. I did not mention the property. The property in question was a mixed-use building on Wabash Avenue in Chicago, 3 commercial floors and 12 residential units above. I'd bought it in 2004 through my LLC, Mercer Holdings, the same name as the street where I'd spent years standing at a pressing iron. The building had been a marginal investment for the first 5 years. Then the neighborhood changed, the way neighborhoods do in Chicago when the right coffee shops open, and suddenly I was collecting rents that bore no resemblance to what I'd pay per square foot. The building's anchor commercial tenant for the past 4 years had been the law firm where my son's girlfriend was now a full partner. She walked past the lobby of my building every single weekday morning. Her name was on the lease that my property manager, a capable and discreet woman named Petra Holt, renewed annually on my behalf. I had never introduced myself to anyone at that firm. I had never had occasion to, until now. I called Petra on a Monday. I'm coming to Chicago next month, I said. I'd like to do a walkthrough of the Wabash building. Of course, she said. Anything specific you want me to prepare? Pull the commercial lease renewal, I said. The law firms. A pause. They're up for renewal in November. 3 months out. I know, I said. I want to review it. What I did next was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because revenge is a thing people do when they're still bleeding, and I had stopped bleeding a long time ago. What I did was simply make a decision about what I wanted my property to be used for. I called Clyde. I told him I decided not to renew the commercial lease on the Wabash building's ground and second floors. I wanted to convert that space to a community legal aid clinic, staffed by attorneys on a pro bono rotation, serving clients who couldn't afford representation. I'd fund the operating costs through the trust for 3 years while the clinic established itself. I'd already spoken to the director of the Ohio State Law School's pro bono program. They were interested. That's a significant income reduction, Clyde said. I know what it is, I said. He was quiet for a moment. When does the current tenant need to be notified? 90 days before the lease end, I said. So August. All right, he said. I'll prepare the non-renewal notice. My son called me in late July. His girlfriend had mentioned that her firm was dealing with some uncertainty around their Chicago office space. He asked, with studied casualness, if I'd heard anything about commercial real estate in that part of the city. I said I hadn't been following the market closely. He said that was too bad. He said her firm had been in that building for 4 years and moving would be a real headache. He said the building's owner had apparently decided to do something with the space, some kind of non-profit thing. And wasn't it odd how people made business decisions that didn't make any financial sense? I agreed that it was sometimes hard to understand other people's priorities. He said, yeah. Then he told me they'd found a condo they liked in Lincoln Park. He said the down payment was significant. I told him congratulations. I told him I hoped the space was everything they needed. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window for a while, watching the birds at the feeder I'd put up 3 summers ago. A pair of house finches were working through the sunflower seeds with businesslike focus. I refilled my coffee and watched them for a few minutes. Then I called Dwight. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to document everything you found about the correspondence with the Austin Company. Full report, sourced, with copies of what you can legally obtain. And I need the name of a good securities attorney in Chicago." Dwight gave me a name. I called her that afternoon. Her name was Annika Solberg, and she had the focused, no preamble quality of someone who billed by the 6-minute increment and respected your time because she respected her own. I outlined what Dwight had found. She asked 3 clarifying questions and then told me what I needed to do. I submitted the information through the SEC's whistleblower portal on a Thursday evening, using the secure system they provided for exactly that purpose. I did not submit it anonymously. I submitted it with my name, my contact information, and Dwight's full documented report attached. 2 weeks later, a woman named Regulator Compliance Investigator, she introduced herself by her title and her last name only on the phone, called me to confirm receipt and ask 3 follow-up questions. She was professional and thorough. She told me their process typically took several months. She told me I would be notified if they needed anything further. I thanked her and went back to work. My son called me in September. He didn't say hello the way he usually did. His voice was tighter, the kind of tight that comes from holding something in for days before finally letting it out. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." "All right," I said. I sat down at my kitchen table. "Her firm is being investigated. The SEC. There's been a thing with a merger. Some correspondence that apparently looked like, they're saying, insider information. She says it's a misunderstanding. Her attorneys say it's a misunderstanding." He stopped. "Did you have anything to do with this?" I considered the question carefully. "I provided information to a regulatory body," I said. Information I had good reason to believe was accurate. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. "Mom." His voice broke just slightly on that one word. "She could lose her license." "I know," I said. "She could lose everything. She won't lose everything. She won't lose everything. She won't lose everything. But there are consequences for certain things. You understand that." "Why?" He sounded lost. Not angry yet, but getting there. "Why would you do that? Is this because of the dinner? Because she was because things felt awkward?" "This has nothing to do with the dinner," I said quietly. The information I submitted was about professional conduct that affected real people, people whose retirement accounts were involved, people who had no idea their interests were being compromised. "You don't know that." "I know enough," I said. "I've been doing this a long time." Another silence. "I want to come to Columbus," he said finally. "I want to sit down with you." "Come when you're ready," I said. "You know where I am." He came on a Saturday in October. He drove down alone. She'd stayed in Chicago, he said. She had a lot to deal with. He looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair he'd sat in his whole life and wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I'd set in front of him the way he'd always done since he was 12 years old. "I need to understand something," he said. "Ask," I said. "At the dinner." He looked at the table, then up at me. "When I gave the envelope back, when I didn't open it, were you trying to tell me something?" "I was giving you a gift," I said. "You chose not to receive it." "I didn't want to make a thing of it in front of everyone." "I know. Her family has money. I didn't want it to seem like I didn't want you to feel out of place." I looked at my son for a moment. He was 41 years old and sat at my table like a boy who'd lost something and wasn't sure what. "I have never felt out of place in my life," I said. "Not once. Not at that restaurant. Not anywhere." He looked at me. "You felt out of place on my behalf," I said. "That's different, and it tells me something about how you see me." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car went by slowly. The house finches were at the feeder again. "How much was in the envelope?" he finally asked. I told him. He set down his coffee mug and was silent for a long time. Mom, he said. He stopped, tried again. Mom, where does that? From 34 years of work, I said. From a dry cleaning shop on Mercer Street and some property decisions that everyone told me were mistakes. Property decisions, he repeated slowly. I own 14 buildings, I said, including the one on Wabash Avenue where her firm has been leasing space for 4 years. He stared at me. I chose not to renew their lease, I said. I'm converting the space to a legal aid clinic. It will serve people who can't afford an attorney. It will serve people who lose retirement savings when someone in a position of trust makes decisions that benefit them personally. My son sat at my table and I watched something move across his face. A whole sequence of things, arriving and departing like weather. Shock, recalculation, something that might have been shame. Something that came after the shame that was harder to name. All this time, he said. I thought you were. You thought I was a woman who pressed clothes and needed your protection from restaurants that made her feel small, I said. I kept my voice even. I know what you thought. You thought it at that dinner, and you probably thought it for years before that. And I let you think it because I wanted to know what kind of man you'd become when you believed your mother had nothing to offer but love. He didn't say anything, and you became a man who loves his mother, I said, but who is also a little ashamed of her, and I needed to know which one was stronger. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he looked up. Which one is stronger? He asked, and his voice was very quiet. I don't know yet, I said honestly. That's still being determined. He drove back to Chicago that afternoon. He called me from the road once to say he'd gotten to Indiana safely and was thinking. I told him that was a good use of driving time. The legal aid clinic opened in February. I attended the ribbon cutting. The director of the pro bono program gave a short speech about access to justice and what it meant in practice, and a woman in the front row, 40-something, 2 kids beside her, a manila folder in her lap that she kept smoothing with both hands, cried quietly through the whole thing. I stood in the back and watched. My son came. I hadn't told him I was coming. He must have found out through Petra or through Clyde, or simply through the press release that the law school had put out the week before. He found me standing against the back wall and stood beside me without speaking for the whole of the ceremony. Afterward, when the crowd was thinning, he said, "How long did this take to arrange?" "About 6 months," I said. "Once," I decided. "Once you decided at the dinner?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. We stood watching the woman with the manila folder talk to one of the staff attorneys. Her kids were running in small circles around the chairs. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about which one was stronger. I remember. I think I need to show you," he said. "Not tell you. I think telling you isn't worth much right now." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. I'd like to help with this." He gestured at the clinic, the space, the room full of people who'd come for the opening. "With whatever this needs, not with money. I mean actually help. Learn how it works. Help Petra with whatever she needs." I looked at my son. "Come Saturday," I said. "Petra starts orientations at 9. Don't be late." He nodded. He didn't hug me. We weren't quite there yet, but he stood closer than he had at the dinner, and when he said goodbye, he said it the way he used to when he was young. Simple and direct, no performance in it. I drove home to Columbus in the early evening. The highway was clear, and the light on the fields was the particular gold that only comes in February, low and slanted and very clean. I had a thermos of coffee and a podcast I'd been meaning to finish for 2 weeks. My apartment looked the same as it always had when I got home. 1 bedroom, a good kitchen, a window above the sink that caught the morning light, the safe behind the loose baseboard in the closet, same as always. Inside it, property deeds for 14 buildings, investment statements, and an envelope with my son's name on it that I'd resealed after the dinner and put back. Still waiting. Same as it had always been. I put on the kettle and stood at my kitchen window in the dark and watched the lights across the street come on in the apartments there. A kitchen here, a living room there, someone moving behind a curtain with a lamp switched on. 14 buildings, hundreds of families, hundreds of small rooms with their lights on at the end of the day. I had built all of that from a pressing iron and a money market account and a willingness to be patient while everyone else told me I was wrong. I was not done. Saturday. My son showed up at 9 o'clock exactly, in work clothes with a notebook under his arm. Petra put him to work on the tenant applications for the upper floors. He stayed until 5. He asked good questions. He made no assumptions about what he already knew. He called me that evening. "It's more complicated than I thought," he said. "Most things worth doing are," I said. "Petra said you started with one building. One building and a loan I had no business qualifying for," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "The envelope," he said. "Is it still?" "It's still there," I said. "When you're ready." "How do I know when I'm ready?" I thought about that. "You keep showing up on Saturdays," I said. "We'll figure it out from there." He came the following Saturday, and the one after that, and the one after that. I didn't tell him about the trust documents I'd updated in November, the ones that restructured everything, not as an inheritance, but as a partnership. Conditional on involvement, on presence, on showing up to do the actual work of building something that outlasted you. That was what I'd been building for 34 years. Not property, not money. Something that had to be earned by the people who were going to carry it forward. I thought about the woman with the manila folder at the ribbon cutting, her hand smoothing it over and over. I thought about the Saturday my son came in with mud on his boots because he'd been at a property walkthrough in the rain and hadn't stopped to change. I thought about the look on Petra's face when she said quietly to me on the phone, "He's better than I expected." People surprise you sometimes when you stop shielding them from the consequences of who they've been. Some things are not spare change. Some things take 34 years of pressing other people's suits, of being invisible in rooms that thought they knew your value, of watching and waiting and building something so quietly that no one sees it coming until it's already done. My son knows that now. He's still learning it. So am I, learning how to let him learn it, learning how to stop protecting people from the truths that are actually theirs to earn. That envelope is still in the safe. His name is still on it. The light on the buildings I own comes on every evening without fail. And somewhere in 14 different addresses, families are having dinner and doing homework and arguing about dishes and falling asleep in rooms they can count on. That is enough. For now, it is more than enough.